Moving forward to the first panel, presenting the Chachipen research on anti-Gypsyism in Romania. In order to approach transitional justice, we are going to begin with a short story, a short video, a material, something that I'm going to ask my colleague to kindly show to you.
This is a video that we will try to translate into English. According to the international norms, slavery and Holocaust are considered crimes against humanity. And there is a series of legislative pieces that are aiming at blocking such racist activities. These are the fundaments of Romanian racism. It is considered quite an occult term, but this is the reality. In the democratic countries that decided they need reconciliation with the historical past, these terms are used in the following collocation: the fight against racism.
În conformitate cu normele internaționale, sclavia și Holocaustul sunt considerate crime împotriva umanității.
So slavery and Holocaust are considered crimes against the humankind, and the legislation which is currently developing is trying to block such racism against the Roma people. So slavery and Holocaust are the fundaments of Romanian racism. This is a term which unfortunately is not used. It seems that the video gets blocked.
În conformitate cu normele internaționale, sclavia și Holocaustul sunt considerate crime împotriva umanității și există o întreagă legislație în dezvoltare care să blocheze astfel de exprimări rasiste împotriva minorităților naționale, în cazul nostru specific al romilor. Constatarea firească ar fi că sclavia și Holocaustul
So the conclusion is that slavery and Holocaust are the grounds of Romanian racism. Unfortunately, this term is not being used in the Romanian culture as it's being considered occult, forbidden, though this is the reality. In the democratic countries that decided they need historical reconciliation with their own past, these terms are used in the collocation, the fight against racism. The Roma people emigrated from the Indian areas as free people. The first sources from 1385 mention the status of slaves of these people, in which they've been for more than 500 years. The pejorative name was Tsigan, which meant slave. It comes from Greek, from the atinganos, the Greek term, which means untouchable or which is not to be touched. and they were out of the Christian church. The Romanian legislation at that time considered them as assets who were under the ownership of the boyars or owners of large lands. The legal removal of slavery has not led to fundamental changes when it came to the status of the Roma people. In the 1940s, and the reforms that came at that time, the status of the Roma people were not properly taken into account. Many Roma free people had to return to their previous owners as they did not have proper chances of emancipation. We must ask ourselves a series of questions. In 1990, Romania signs at Paris the Treaty on Minorities. The treaty ignores Roma people. Despite this history, in the period between the two wars, the Roma people are emancipating. They are starting the civic movement of the Roma people. It was in 1942, on the 11th of September. It was on the 11th that they took us at 6 a.m. Then they came into our houses, they arrested us and placed us under military guard. The head of defense towards the Ministry of Defense. I have the honor to inform you on the following. All the nomad gypsies, with no exception, have been evicted to Transnistria, as the Council of Ministers ordered this. Dear Commander, the gendarmes in the county of Argeș made their duty and they evicted all the gypsies from Pitești in Transnistria. Congratulations for this, for completing this mission. All of a sudden, there was this cup. In the past, we would call them cups. So the cup told us, well, they'll take you to Transnistria. Our Roma people had no idea what Transnistria was. And then the cup said, they'll take you to Bug. The nomads, Roms, went to Transnistria with their own means of transportation. And when they got there, their horses and carriages were taken away from them, and their identity papers were also seized. To remove them from the civic existence and from the physical existence. Dear God, so many bad things happened to us, and we're still not dead. Look at us, we're not dead. The deported Roma were subject to forced labor. They were undernourished and they never received medical services. More than half of the deported Roma were died because of diseases, and sometimes they were the victims of crimes. What can we do in order to make sure the horrors of the past will not occur again? Undernourished and deprived of medical help, they were the victims of diseases, contagious diseases that led to the death of many of the deported Roma people. In Landau, on the 7th of February 1944, to the prefecture of Berezovka. In the month of December,
media morților s-a ridicat zilnic la un număr de circa 200-250 de morți. Pe toate aceste cadavre mișunau păduchi de aproape un deget grosime. Din cauza celor mai sus
Around
relatate,
2,000 people died daily. Lice were found on these dead people. We could not keep the track of the dead or those who were alive. On the 25th of November, 309 Gypsy people died. Because of the ill treatment, more than 300 people died. Bodies were found on the Ochakov-Alexandrova road. They died because of starvation and cold. The camps of gypsies, they are dirty, barefoot, and only wearing rags. In the Berezovka county, 3,000 gypsy people died. And there were also cases when the bodies of the dead were kept indoors as people wanted to receive their food portions. Sometimes us, the girls, I was that tall, we would go out and collect the grains of wheat we could find on the fields, whatever the Russians left behind. We would just try to break them into our own fingers. And then we boil them and eat that broth. We were the second country after Germany that registered Nazi victims. We want to reconcile with our historical past. These reconciliations actually started in 2004 when the Romanian state accepted the conclusions of the final report of the International Committee for studying the Holocaust in Romania. The same research institute was set up, which will gradually treat the Holocaust of the Roma people. In April 2015, the European Parliament adopted a day to celebrate the Holocaust in Romania. The Romanian state also adopted such a day in 2015. Though we are Roma, I'm called Gypsy. Roma are considered primitive nomads whose rights to free movement are limited. The European countries are saying that the Roma people are a problem of the Romanian state. And the Romanian state says that we are a problem of Europe. In order to acknowledge the status of the Roma people, we are to introduce racism in the school curriculum. We must organize all kind of events and inform the citizens about the slavery and the Holocaust of Roma people.
Mulțumim frumos. În continuare îl vom invita alături de noi pe domnul Iulius Rostas, expert independent și cel care a finalizat cercetarea națională Chachipen.
Thank you so much. Now we are going to give the floor to Mr. Rostas, the researcher who completed this report we are talking about. Mr. Rostas, please. Thank you so much. I'm going to speak in Romanian. I wrote the report in English. That's why sometimes terminology in Romania seems a little bit forced, but I will try to do my best. One of the fundamental questions of this project was the following. How do we think about the past and how do you think about the present in our case? And we thought that transitional justice offers certain instruments by which we can better understand the past, and we can do in such a way that justice prevails in all, like in all democratic societies. In the first step of the project, we carry out the research part, which included a paper on arguments in favor of the instruments of transitional justice, and in the reason, and also arguments in favor of using these arguments in order to improve the situation of the Roma population in Europe. I carried out research in different countries, in Sweden and Germany, Spain and Romania. Of course, in Sweden and in Germany, some of these instruments have already been applied, especially experts committees investigating the past and raising awareness on it. In Romania and Spain, so far, these committees have not been set up in order to present a plan and to propose measures. But Spain has adopted a law dedicated to historic past and memory, and they are taking steps in order to establish such committees. But in Romania, the situation is not clear at all. I would like to say that in the paper I've written, I have enjoyed the help of Ciprian Nodiș, who did the field work, and we investigated what might be the motivation of Roma activists, but not only Roma activists. Why do they ask for transitional justice instruments to be applied in the case of the Roma population? And the arguments, I'm going to explain what they are. We are talking about the Roma population, the matter of slavery, and also racism, structural racism, a problem that we all deal with today. And I would like to explain why these reasons are important. Slavery, first of all. It has not been very much studied. There hasn't been much research in this field, and not enough funds are earmarked for this research in slavery. There was one major project when it comes to studying slavery. Verera and Viorel Achim, two researchers who are not Roma, on the Iorga Institute. All of the other pieces of research were individual. And it is not enough. Of course, slavery is not well known to the public in Romania. And even Roma population does not know about this subject. And this fact of not knowing one's past is a form of oppression, not knowing one's origins. And the process of removing slavery was a project that was not completed because the Roma population was freed, but they were not free, not in a definitive way. They did not become full citizens with full rights. Even today, in Romania, the Roma population is not considered to be a population of full citizens. And also, the Roma population has not been compensated for their suffering. On the contrary, the slave owners were compensated. And there has not been an official apology from the Romanian state or from the Orthodox Church. In 1999, the then president, Emil Constantinescu, participated in an event organized by the Roma organizations on the 20th of February, which ever since 2011 has been acknowledged by the Romanian state as the day dedicated to commemorating Roma slavery. And we were expecting the then president to present official excuses, an official apology, but it did not happen. It was simply a symbolic gesture of one individual, and it only happened one. And we had Constantin Bălăceanu Stolnici, just one figure, just saying that in name of his personal family, he would like to apologize for everything that Roma slavery meant. When it comes to the Holocaust, there are many problems in acknowledging Roma people as victims of Holocaust. And we can also see this in the public perception. We must say that in Romania, the responsibility for Roma deportation to Transnistria belongs to the Romanian state, because the Romanian government was the one deporting the Roma population. There is a wrong perception saying that those who were responsible for the Roma deportations were the Germans. It was Germany doing it. And this erroneous perception has its source, first of all, in the official narrative during communist times, when authorities and also the academia narrative stated that Nazi Germany was responsible for the Romanian Holocaust. But it is not true. Ion Antonescu and his government were Hitler's allies, yes, but deportation operations were initiated and completed by the Ion Antonescu cabinet, Ion Antonescu government. So at that time, that was the government of Romania. The second source of this erroneous perception was that after 1990, Germany and Switzerland offered humanitarian help to survivors of those deportations. But those are not compensations. This was only some humanitarian help. Compensations are something else. Of course, there was a presidential, at some point there was a presidential committee for the study of the Holocaust. It presented a final report. I would like to say that in that committee, there was only one member of the Roma community, which is quite little. And what was important is that the final report contains many pieces of information that are not exact and many gaps in information. And certain events were not investigated thoroughly. such as mass atrocities, mass murders in Transnistria. Therefore, even to this day, there is a lack in Romanian perception, promoted even by the Elie Wiesel Institute. And this erroneous perception says that 25,000 Roma people were deported. We should be very skeptical, and we should look in archives a little bit better, to dig there a little bit better, to see what really happened. Just as we don't have an exact figure when it comes to the deportation of Jewish people in Transnistria, the same, we cannot affirm that we have a very precise number when it comes to how many Roma people were deported. We must always apply the same measures when we analyze these two situations. It is well known that Romanian authorities were not very thorough in registering what happened in official documents, and there is a lack of clarity in the specialized literature to see how many people survived deportations. And here I would like to quote Viorel Kim. Numbers, figures differ. Some say 6,000, other people say 14,000. So it's really a very confusing situation when it comes to the numbers. So I think that this report should be seen with that report should be seen with skepticism, and it is only one little step forward in taking responsibility for what happened to the Roma people, but it should not be taken as a complete truth. Then there is another problem. When it comes to deported Roma people, the official narrative, unfortunately, has been taken over by many historians, and it says that nomadic Roma people were deported, and Roma people who were considered criminals, so who had infringed the law in a way or another. Therefore, this would have meant that the measure was related to public safety, but it's not true. Had it been a public safety measure, it would have been different. If it had been a matter of public safety, they would have deported anyone who had committed any sort of crime in Romania, not only Roma people who had committed a crime. So it cannot be true. That is a very bizarre way of thinking, if you ask me, when it comes to the deportations. But we know, and we have proof in the archives, that we had Roma people who were owners, who had their own house, who were deposed of their houses and were deported. But when it comes to deportations, Romanian authorities were very insidious because of two elements. On the one hand, Romanian government used a false propaganda, and they at that time said that Roma people would receive land in Transnistria. So many Roma people believed that, and they asked to voluntarily go to Transnistria without knowing what would happen to them there. Secondly, on the one hand, Romanian authorities mobilized Roma men to work on the front in the war, and then deported the families. Fortunately, a Roma historian went there and did some research and published a book on this subject. I believe that we should update the final report of the President's Commission for the Study of Holocaust. And I think we should look better at what happened, even when it comes to denazification of survivors and the reintegration of survivors. We should analyze that too. And the third subject that we have studied, and also another reason supporting the use of transitional justice instruments, is the lack of capacity that Romanian authorities have to combat structural racism. Of course, there is an anti-discrimination campaign, but we know that the strategy has many gaps, and not only in Romania. It is not that effective in actually fighting against racism. The second argument. There is a limited impact of policies when it comes to making real changes in Roma people's lives. We need more political will and a systematic effort of our society in order to obtain results. Because after 160 years of systematic exclusion of the Roma people, you can imagine we cannot simply forget everything that happened, and we cannot simply overcome everything that happened with a little strategy without having a significant effort from all the authorities and also from the entirety of society. Therefore, we have a few factors that lead to inequalities between Roma people and Romanians. School segregation, the expression of racism towards Roma people, environmental racism. Many Roma people and many communities are established in areas that are contaminated in one way or another, where their health is in danger. Or they are set in places nearby rivers where there is a risk of flooding, so they are always at risk of losing their belongings, and also residential segregation. All of these things run in circles, and we have a vicious circle. And of course, we must talk about police violence and racism in the Romanian police. We have to mention this. Romania, alongside Bulgaria, has many cases of police violence reported to the European Court of Human Rights. The police is an institution we all come into contact with daily, and the police is also the body that has the legitimacy, the power to use force in a legitimate way, but it happens too often. It is too often that police uses force and fire guns in the relationship with Roma communities. So we have this phenomenon of over-policing. Then we have a hate speech that we notice. Unfortunately, in Romania, there were former presidents such as Traian Băsescu, but also prime ministers, Tăricianu, Ponta, not to mention other politicians. They engage in racist speech against Roma population, which is absolutely unacceptable. To promote wrong ideas about Roma people being in a position of authority in the Romanian state. Hate speech leads to an environment that is very stressful on a psychological front, and also it discourages Roma people to defend their rights. Of course, there is discrimination, injustice, and many people don't talk about that. We presented in our document a judge who was working in the Superior Council of the Magistrature in Romania and who made some statements that were racist towards the Roma people. And that person, who was also a professor at the School of Law, was named at the European Court of Justice. So I'm wondering if the people who named her there and who accepted her naming in that position would also condone her speech. The judge was saying that sterilizing women, that she would sterilize Roma women so that they don't reproduce anymore because their birth rate is too high. You will find the exact quote in the paper that was published on the site of the project.
Să vedeți acolo exact ce și cum s-a întâmplat. Aș mai spune doar că în lucrare.
And I would also add that in this paper we are also discussing terminology. For instance, in English, our proposal would be to use interchangeably anti-Gypsyism and anti-Roma racism. However, and of course, their translation into the languages where that is needed. In the Romanian cultural space, because of the slavery history and the pejorative meaning of the word Țigan, our proposal is to rather use the formula racism against Roma, and only after this, the anti-Gypsyism translation into Romanian. And for these two proposals, we have various arguments. However, I do not want to take too much of your time to focus on this. Moreover, there are some proposals in relation to what we can do. First and foremost, updating the Wiesel Committee's report. As compared to 2003 and 2004, we nowadays have a number of Roma historians and non-Roma historians who studied this topic, including outside this country, so they are not necessarily Romanians. And such a group of historians could update that report, of course, with the support and right access to the archives. Secondly, we should revive the committee for studying the slavery of Roma people. It still exists at a formal level, but it is not operational. Therefore, that would be a solution, as groups of experts could be set up in order to focus on specific topics, such as the condition of Roma women who were slaves, the condition of the children or elderly, or they could study certain periods of time, or they could focus on geographical areas. We think there are multiple solutions. Once the truth is revealed, it should be made available to the large audiences, including in the educational system, and through various other means, such as by setting up the longly awaited museum dedicated to Roma culture, or commemorative event. And of course, another proposal would be to place under scrutiny the people who are appointed in public position for various infringements, not only infringement of the law, but also moral infringement. For instance, I cannot imagine appointing an ambassador, appointing a person in the position of ambassador who had made anti-Semitic statements, or a judge at the European Court of Human Rights, a person that had made in the past racist statements. In my opinion, this is unacceptable. And I would also like to invite you to read the paper. It's in English. It has not been translated yet in other languages, but we hope at some point it will become available in Romanian. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much, Mr. Rostas. I will now pass the floor to Mrs. Maria Dumitru.
I think already Iulius have explained you the structure of the report. I will just go in this brief minutes that I have, just in special parts of the report that I think that can be some addings or highlighting the contribution and so on. I will start with the executive summary. I think the executive summary is very, very well made. I think it's inviting the reader to find out what the report is about. I will just, sometimes people read just the executive summary, and to make sure that they get what is needed to get. I think a small elaboration maybe on the part on just a small definition on the Robia, and for example, that it was 500 years of slavery, or something that, many people don't know what are the situation of the Roma in Romania, and maybe just one line, the Roma live in these conditions, the access to employment or whatever is very limited, that there are this number of the Roma in Romania, is just to set the scene. And also, I know that, we are here talking about anti-Gypsyism, but when we will invite readers to read this report, not everyone knows what is anti-Gypsyism. And I think in the executive summary, it would have been valuable to have just a very small definition of anti-Gypsyism. The part one, the historically and rooted anti-Gypsyism in Romania, I think, your analysis is very nicely written. It's clear, it's informed by a range and interdisciplinary sources. I really like that you engage with academic sources, and you explain very carefully how, Roma enslavement have been written by these prominent scholars like Venera and Viorela Kim, and you state that there is still more necessary to study this part, to study this historical episode in our Romanian history. And also you say, and also you engage with sources from Roma historians like Petcuț or sociologists like Fortuna. So I really like that. And I think it's a piece that is contributing on the existing literature. But just some suggestions, for instance, many people don't know actually how slavery was working in this 500 years of slavery. And to prove that it was not so, I think it's also sometimes necessary to discuss this more, to highlight a bit more, and probably when you select the codes, for the Kalimach code, like the 27 article, maybe a small explanation about the Robia would have been a bit more clear, because you see in this article they say, well, the master didn't have the right to kill their slave, right? And then if the reader who don't know anything about this, they would say, well, it was not that bad, right? And then it's go line with the narrative that we are arguing against. And probably it would have been great to example with some examples of torture, of things of persecutions and so on. But other than that, I really think you touch upon this, you explain how it worked, you explain the narrative, and I really think it's a great contribution. To go forward, I found your analysis on the part on the Roma Holocaust extremely well. I myself am not so well informed, and I really find your piece very well written, very well to comprehend how this, to understand how the racial motive was behind all this deportation. I really like, and I congratulate you that you challenge the sayings of Hakim, because in some part he said, well, the race was not an issue and was not a motive for deport the Roma, but then in other articles he does mentions that the race was the factor of deporting the Roma. And I think that is very good, and also it will open up more discussions, and it really adding on the literature on the deportation. I think you made a great contribution also to explain the lack of compensation in this regard. And I really think that with this piece, you highlight how the process was made, that it was made in phases, and so on. To go forward, because the time is very limited, I like in the part 2, when you describe the manifestations of anti-Gypsyism in Romania, I think you've done an excellent review how all this structural discrimination is manifested and all the consequences in terms of school segregation, hate speech, environmental racism, and so on. And for the first thing, the school segregation, I think is extremely important how you wrote, how you noted. I can see your expertise in the area. I would just maybe highlight the fact that many of us, many of people, many readers do not know and do not connect that school segregation. It's a direct consequence of the residential segregation. And I think this goes hand in hand. You already highlighted that in the presentation, but maybe further in the report, if there will be a follow-up, will be a good add. I just have here maybe just one question. I was wondering why the part of access to help or employment has not been touched upon. Maybe this is just a question, a reflection. The next part, I really like that for the law enforcement and administration of justice, you choose both a female and a male case. And I think you pointed out how inadequately have been addressed. I will just have a small adding, because you mentioned that there were various cases of Roma from Romania in the European Court of Human Rights. Maybe some people would be curious, or maybe in the appendix, a list of those cases, or a small line with the names of the cases, is just to, I think it would have been positively add more info. I like a lot in the part of the hate speech how you analyze how politicians spread hate and how this is totally accepted. And I think you pointed on the spot. I was just maybe wondering, because we all know how important is media, we all know what huge factor plays in spreading hate, and I was just wondering why media and social media was not an interest in for you, or how it went. About the part of environmental justice, I think the concept and what you wrote about environmental racism, I think it's a very great part that we have discussed, that we have to discuss. I really think it's innovative. It's something that many people don't think and don't connect, that the Roma lives in the ghettos or are evacuated in the worst places with the worst quality of air and living in contaminated areas. They don't think that this is another manifestation of racism or anti-Gypsyism. And I think you explained very well. You take all these 5 cases. It's very informative. I'm sure many people, including people from Romania, are not aware of this. And I think you pointed very well. And I really like that part. And I really hope it will be a national interest, because Obviously, there are extremely big issues regarding this. The other part of the exclusion from knowledge production and lack of cultural institution, I think you pointed very well that although Romania, let's say, have a higher number than other countries in terms of Roma with higher education, there is still a lack of jobs for those people, and I think that's very good. And also you put this thing that you analyze how other communities or other minorities like Hungarians, Germans or Jewish have their own culture institutions. For instance, Hungarian have 9 and the Roma have 9 theaters and the Roma has none. And I think here we can see the lack of equity and proportionality in terms of this. And I think you highlighted very well. And hopefully the readers will also see how different and how discriminatory it is. The part 3, I think it's extremely well written. I don't have a lot of feedback on that. I would say just that my biggest adding in general for the report would be that when we speak about anti-Gypsyism, to include the gender factor. I think that in general, when we work in this and research, we could have a more holistic overview of its meaning, manifestations, and consequences, how this affect Romani women in Romania. So just to give you a brief understanding of what is gender anti-Gypsyism, which was mainly coined by feminist activists and organizations in Spain, but now it's also used in Romania by different organizations like Romia or other feminists. And we understand like the stereotypes in general when are addressed to Roma are, like the base of anti-Roma. And they are very different, right? The stereotypes are for both Roma and both men, although also collectively. But they are different in its meaning. And this form of racism, anti-Gypsyism, can tend to be called neutral or directed collective, but it has a really differential impact on the rights of women and men. Sorry.
Mă auziți? Putem concluziona pentru că nu mai avem timp.
Da, încă puțin, nu mai am un minut. Sure. Other than that, I really think that your report, it's a great contribution. Thank you so much for your work. I can see both your expertise and Cyprian. I think this work can be a great tool. Your recommendations are clear, are applicable, which is very important, are very much inspired by the reality. And I really hope that your work will be read. I hope that it will be a strong tool, and very looking forward to see the outcome and the reactions of other people. I would have much more comments, but it's just a technical. Thank you so much, and that's it. Thank you for having me.
Mulțumim frumos și noi. În continuare vom merge la panelul 2, instrumente pentru lupta împotriva antiziganismului cu rădăcini istorice.
We shall now switch to the second panel. Oh, okay, so let's see if there are questions.
Bună ziua! Probabil că nu mă... da, se vede. Isabela Mihalache de la Rețeaua Europeană pentru Organizațiile...
My name is Isabela Mihalache. So I'd like to congratulate Iulius. I had the privilege to receive the entire report, 90 pages long. I found it a breath of fresh air because I've never had the opportunity to read such a comprehensive report that explains the tragic history of the Roma population in Romania. At the same time, there was a very unexpected analysis, very critical, because you also speak about what happens beyond these documents. I've really appreciated the transparency of this report. The report mentions something I would like you to clarify if possible. This risk in transitional justice mechanisms. You say that there is a risk that there would be a predominant discourse at the level of Romanian society from non-Roma population. And I wanted to understand better what risk you have in mind exactly. What do you mean with having a risk associated to transitional justice? And how can we avoid this risk? Are there any other questions, even from our colleagues in Zoom?
Yes, I would like to pose a question. Stefan Müller, Central Council of German Sinti and Roma. I will chair the next session, but I would like to raise one question. I didn't have a chance yet to read the full report, but what I would like to ask Iulius is how much is all, let's say, the pogroms and all the violence which happened beginning of the 90s in Romania? I saw it in the summary that you referred to it. My question is, how much is this now possible to talk about in Romania? Is there any commitment from authorities at local level, but also at national level, to address these pogroms and to talk also publicly about it? Thanks.
Mulțumim.
Hello.
Thank you.
Mai sunt alte întrebări?
Are there other questions?
Yes, here is Lina Vasiluta, research fellow from CEPS, Center for European Policy Studies. So we would like to, also to congratulate Iulius Rostas, our dear colleague and friend, with the report, as well as Cyprian Nodis. And I would like also to pass the floor or for a short comment or introduction for, by scientific coordinator Sergio Carrera, because as SEPS we have been also like scientific coordinators of this report, and it has been great to hear Maria's comments. However, we would like also to hear comments from Sergio.
Thank you, Lina. That's very kind. I would like also to come back as a comment, but also a question for Iulius, because I join the colleagues praising the work he's done with the co-author, the very high quality of the research they've done, and the uniqueness and the innovativeness of the reports. Also, the report includes very important recommendations based on their research, and also drawing from previous Chachipen national reports, lessons learned in Germany and in Sweden. And I was wondering Iulius' views about the phenomenon that he's described and investigated quite in depth in the reports, institutionalized racism. When we are facing very clear manifestations of institutionalized racism, not only in police and law enforcement, but even he mentioned the justice system, people who are judges, and that they are even sent to European courts. How transitional justice, the notion and the instruments of transitional justice help in addressing this phenomenon, and more particularly the role of the European Union here. Now, the European Union, we know also from your report, Iulius, has supported very much this so-called Roma strategy framework, and it has the EU anti-racism also program, but somehow there is a disconnect between the work of the European Union on racism and the contribution that the EU is doing in addressing rule of law backsliding or rule of law threats, which include institutionalized discrimination. So far the focus has not been paid to making use of the tools that the EU has at its disposal when you have captured injustice, you have structural cases of injustice. So I was wondering, Iulius, if you could develop a little bit more on your recommendations, particularly the one on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a model. How do you see that working out, nationally across, different member states and at EU level? How for example, the European Parliament could also bring in or play a role in having a kind of EU level commissions, commission of commissions in a way, to make sure that the EU plays more of an active role in facilitating perhaps these processes, while acknowledging the specificities that we find in each local and national context and each country in Europe, and at the same time highlighting the commonalities, that we are talking about equal citizens, equal EU citizens, and acknowledging the contribution that those citizens have made and are making to what we understand as Europe. So I wanted to, actually, it's more of a question to Julius, to know more about his views on this.
Mulțumim și noi. Alte întrebări mai sunt?
Thank you. If there are any other questions? No. Then I will give the floor to Mr. Rostas in order for him to answer your questions. Thank you. I will try to be brief. Maria, thank you. It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for your feedback. One of the challenges in writing this report was how far can we go? The initial plan was to have 20 to 30 pages. And then we reached almost 90 pages. And it's very good to know that we live in times where people don't read reports that are this long. You have to be brief. That's why we tried to focus on factors that lead to structural inequalities between Roma people and non-Roma people. Indeed, thank you so much for the suggestions. I would like to insist on the gender component in anti-Roma racism, because very eloquent cases here were those related to forced sterilization. Unfortunately, in Romania, we haven't documented these cases, so we need further research. But I absolutely agree that we need to have an extended piece of research in order to give more attention to the gender component. Because in the case of Roma women, racism is a form of oppression a little bit differently, especially for Roma women. So we have to acknowledge that there is a gender component. When it comes to risks, the risk of omitting something, also the risks related to committees of truth and reconciliation. Well, we're not talking only about that. We're also talking about committees of experts. So in the committees for truth and reconciliation, we might have situations in which abusers might come forward and acknowledge their facts, acknowledge their deeds, which might lead to a sort of reconciliation. This instrument would be very useful in case of interethnical conflicts. But the risk that I have seen is that these committees might be established in a very formal matter, with experts who will reproduce the dominant discourse about Roma people. An example from this work. In one committee, the work on Roma people was dominated by one historian, and this was not a good thing, I would say, because we risk having a committee that will simply reproduce the narrative. But having Roma people present there and having different points of view that respect the historical truth and that document what happened, it's something that is fundamental, of course. Then, violence against Roma people in Romania at the beginning of the 1990s. And they went on, I have to say, they didn't stop in the 1990s, early 1990s. We know that even in the 2000s, there were some cases. Especially in Ținutul Secuiesc, which is an area in Romania with a very dominant Hungarian population. So there were conflicts between the Hungarian population and the Roma population. There is a certain level of openness on the level of Romanian authorities, but some cases had to go to the European Court of Human Rights. And the solutions there are only individual, personal. So nothing brought a real reconciliation among parties. And here I would like to give an answer to Sergio. One of the essential elements of transitional justice is reconciliation. So beyond the law, which is applied on an individual, on a case-by-case basis, reconciliation is a collective process. It also has some individual aspects, of course. For instance, we can have former abusers present themselves in front of the committees for truth and reconciliation. They can apologize for what happened, for what they did, which does not exonerate them from what happened, but there can be a debate and a reconciliation between groups, communities, and that is fundamental. We have to admit it, any policy in terms of Roma people would entail other resources as well, but without the support of the majority population, no strategy for Roma people, regardless of the resources, will be successful. So how do we tell the majority population, look, you can allow your children to learn alongside Roma children? How do we convince the majority population that we need higher funds for Roma people? We know that there's so much prejudice. And we know that the Roma people are seen as lazy people. So we need a systematic effort here in order to convince the majority population and the institutions of the state that they have to adopt such measures. We have to bring forward arguments. And here we need to work with both groups, Roma people and the majority population. But first of all, we also have to have some sort of historic reconciliation, because we must acknowledge the importance of certain elements such as slavery, the Holocaust, and also the oppression of Roma people during communism, which affected enormously Roma communities. Of course, how would I see this process? Ideally, in each member state, there should be at least a commission of experts that would propose a process, including committees for truth and reconciliation, maybe on a local level. It would be ideal if these truth and reconciliation committees were at the level of those communities where there used to be inter-ethnic conflicts or where there are tensions now. I think that reforms, once we have the research, all of these things, the research, everything that we've done should be included in their school curricula. And we should have institutions for identity representation of the Roma people in order to fight against the erroneous perceptions on the Roma people. And we should sanction any kind of issues in public discourse that is not inclusive. It would be excellent if on the level of the EU there was some sort of commission that might play the role of a resource center and that might support local committees, national committees. For instance, a commission from Romania might learn so much from the experience of a committee in Germany, let's say, or Sweden, let's say, or Spain, let's say. So the more we are exposed to information, the more we learn from others, we just avoid repeating the same mistakes, and also we manage to maintain the specificities that are related to local history.
And I think all this would represent a momentum of the Roma movement in Europe, because these measures are for the benefit of the entire society, not just for the Roma communities. It's a sort of a sense of healing for the entire society, because those wounds exist within the society. So we see the urge, the need to heal them, and we can make a major effort to this effect. And transitional justice, as the previous experience showed, can help in all this process. I shall stop here. There are plenty of things I would like to say, but we're short on time, so I'd rather stop here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Rostas.